It's time for the Bible. We don't really know for sure what is and what is not. Holy Ghost, God, baby, God blasted on the spot. Ghost, friends, it's time for the Bible.
Hi folks, it's the Bible Geek again, after a bit of a hiatus in which I've been working like crazy on my book, Holy Fable, the Bible Undistorted by Faith. It's going to be a long one. This podcast is not going to be a long one, though, because I have to just wedge in bits of time when I can, and that's about the state of things today. However, let me plug my Tillich collection, The Ground of Being, which is available on Amazon. The Ground of Being, Neglected Essays of Paul Tillich, with a preface by Thomas Altizer. It's a great one. Okay, let's see. From the Trickster. Is Trickster here? I've just been listening to History in the Bible podcasts during discussing James the Just. When talking about who James died, the folk on the podcast said that he was, one, thrown from the roof of the temple by the Pharisees while midway through a sermon. I've never had quite that reaction to a sermon. This did not kill him. This guy's like Rasputin. Then, two, stoned by the Pharisees. This did not kill him. So eventually he was, three, clubbed to death using some large specified club. A launderer's club. Right? The guys on the podcast discussed this as if it was simply a true account of what happened. I remain a bit skeptical. While it's possible that someone could survive a fall from the temple, I would imagine the subsequent stoning would be enough to finish them off. Unless there was a shortage of stones, that is, which would make the stoning a bit pathetic, seems unlikely. To me it sounds more like three alternative martyrdom stories have been harmonized into a single narrative. But what thinketh the geek? How do we know, quote-unquote, what happened to James? What theories have others come up with about the death of the, quote, historical, unquote, James? How likely is any of the above story to be true? That is tough to say, but oddly enough, I have to admit, this is not that implausible a harmonization. Excuse me. Holy mackerel. Though it is one, but occasionally you do just have odd facts here in fragmentary form, and they can be joined together. It doesn't seem to me that, like it's supposed to be a spontaneous thing, not a setup, according to Josephus anyway, and who tells a similar story, providing he is not a rewrite of Josephus. That's a pet theory of mine. It was apparently sort of a shock because the people that had invited James to address the Jewish Christians to set them straight about this Jesus nonsense, as they viewed it, they were shocked to hear what he said. They didn't know he belonged to them. He was just an extremely devout Jew that everybody would have respect for. So when he says, why do you ask me concerning the Son of Man and all that, they're shocked and they bolt, and apparently somebody standing beside him shoves him off of this high pulpit thing. He's not supposed to be on the roof, I don't think. And he falls, and there probably was a shortage of stones inside the temple. So people, again, spontaneously throw what they've got at him. And it's not impossible that he wouldn't have died from that. It would have been a kind of pathetic stoning, which is why somebody who happened to have a laundryman who happened to have his club with him decided to finish him off, because as you know, many Pharisees were employed in secular jobs as well, so that isn't even that odd. So I don't find it that problematic, but I'm with you. It does seem to me it's a little more likely to be a harmonization of three different stories, but it's really impossible to tell. However, the irony of it is that if it is indeed a collection of James' martyrdom stories, that would make it look a bit more like there's some basis to it. It doesn't prove it, but if it implies that some event has given rise to different versions in the telling. But as with the empty tomb and the resurrection appearance stories, if they're too contradictory, you just can't, or the death of Judas by hanging or exploding, like you can never be sure. But it actually does make the historicity of a martyrdom of James a bit more likely, though who knows. I'm not really trying to hedge my bets here. I'm much less putting a hedge around the Torah, but I'm trying to give a nuanced answer that gives each of the possibilities the weight it deserves, and none of them is especially weighty. Oh boy, the weather's getting to me. But I think your instincts are sound, and we'll never really know. Okay. Now another thing, a wild card that gets thrown into this is the Josephus account about the stoning of James, the brother of Jesus, called the Anointed. As Richard Carrier says, it's very likely that this is not even referring to James the Just, but early Christians thought so. So if that's the case, you might have the origin of the whole story, which would be a legend, in a case of mistaken identity. So who the heck knows? I hope we discover some thing better than the so-called James ossuary to settle the deal. Okay. P.S. Any chance you could comment on the two pieces of music that are used alternately to end the show? Where do they come from, and why were they selected? The instrumental one sounds familiar, but I just can't place it. I actually have not heard those in years because I don't really listen to the finished product, so I forget. But are we still using the one from the band Darkest of the Hillside Thickets? I don't know. If anybody can tell me, feel free to contribute that info. Let's see, Pete Grant from Folsom, California, and he points out, not Folsom Prison. He says, millions of birds starve to death every year. How do apologists deal with Matthew 6:26? Please answer with your parakeet voice. Now, there's a new one. Let's just look at the... Okay. Look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not more value than they? I don't know that it's... Well, yeah. I guess apologists would just prefer to look at the passage that says, not a bird falls from the limb without the knowledge and apparently the say-so of your heavenly Father, which I guess the point of this one, though, is that the birds who don't starve to death get their food from divine providence and provision. Because they don't all starve, and the ones that don't are not working jobs, right? They're not getting their little lunch pails and going to the factory, the nest factory or something. I think that's really the point. Where do animals get their food? Nature. And that's, in other words, divine providence. So I think that isn't that much of a problem. You might say, well, isn't it cruel that... God lets him starve to begin with, but that's just like a cameo of the larger problem of nature red in tooth and claw. What sort of divine providence is that? Ed Swoman and I go into that in a chapter of our book, Evolving Out of Eden. Let's see. Now, who's the next one here? Padar in Alaska. It says, a recent Skeptic's Guide to the Universe episode introduced me to a debate pitting Steve Novella against some believers concerning the truthfulness of the Bible. The video can be found on a church website, westhartfordchurch.com/skepticsforum. I don't know that I can recommend listening because the audio is so atrocious. Novella addressed the claims of the believers largely by suggesting that they were retconning, essentially laboriously construing biblical content in such a way that it comports with reality as we know it. For example, one of the speakers asserted that Job 9:8, "He alone stretches out the heavens," scooped Hubble's discovery of our expanding universe by thousands of years. I can imagine the believers going down a list of legitimate scientific facts with thesaurus in hand, one hand, Bible in the other, attempting to find anything that sounds frivolously close and claiming correspondence. In fact, you can make a long list of these things. I'm wondering, since these people are apparently unaware of their motivated reasoning, axe grinding, if it'd be helpful to turn this around a little. How far removed could a universe be from ours in terms of physical properties, living inhabitants, and the most basic and outlandish characteristics, and still be similarly supported by the Bible? How ridiculous of an imaginary universe could be concocted that could still be cited as proof that the Bible was prescient? The goal would be to demonstrate that a motivated reading of the Bible could support about anything, therefore hopefully deflating the tenuous connections of the believers and the substance of their arguments. I think that something with a visual component could be especially helpful. It may have been Hitchens that suggested something like this could be done with a cookbook. I think it would be pretty easy to find a bunch of parallels between the Bible and Star Wars, but that may have something to do with why I've learned to loathe Star Wars. Maybe someone has done this already. Let's see. I think maybe Bernard Ram goes into some of these in the Christian view of science and scripture, but of course he was an interesting duck. He rejected straight young earth creationism in the name of science, but he still was an axe grinder. Let's see. Ed Babinski has done a lot of work on this, and we've again, Ed Swoman and I have drawn on Ed Babinski's work, of course with credit, along these lines in the part of Evolving Out of Eden, the section called "The World the Bible Writers Thought They Lived In." And we show Ed showing how claims that the Bible writers knew the earth was round and all that stuff are just ventriloquism. And one thing we point out is that it's not very helpful as a prediction of sorts, which is kind of what they're claiming, really, if you don't understand what the Bible means, quote unquote, supposedly means, until hundreds or thousands of years later. What good did it do? And if you're simply making a claim like the author, whoever he was, of the maps of the ancient sea kings, and other people like that, saying that, here's an oddity that looks like an ancient electrical storage battery has been discovered in Syria, or stuff like that, that it looks like that the ancients knew a lot more than we have given them credit for, which, of course, that's probably true. But if that's what you're saying, if you're saying, look how somebody as early as Noah knew how to build a seafaring craft and so forth, or that the Bible writers knew the earth was a sphere or that the universe was expanding, in that case, why do not similar phrases in other ancient writings denote the same thing, statements about stretching out the universe and all that. If you're trying to say it was inspired knowledge, then that's incongruous, right? If you're trying to say only the Bible had it because the Bible was divinely inspired and God knew before humans discovered it, why are other terms similar to those in the Bible used in other ancient works? But then you'd also have to, and if you're saying, oh yeah, everybody knew it, well then that negates the inspiration claim, right? It renders it useless, and you'd also have to ask, even on that weak version of the claim, what happened to that knowledge? I mean, the knowledge of mummification vanished until it was finally rediscovered. Certain aspects of the jeweler's art were lost and then later rediscovered and so on. But things like the shape of the world and all these things, or nautical engineering, why did they have to be rediscovered? What, was there another flood that destroyed everything that the Bible doesn't tell us about? So it's an absurd business, and it's just desperate. If it's like trying to prove that Bigfoot exists. It's religiously irrelevant, even if it's true. It's just sort of bringing the Bible down to the level of a newspaper horoscope or something. Monk MC says, having grown up with religious parents who were and are very active in their church, I guess I'm a little confused as to why belief never held any interest for me. I was pushed to have perfect attendance at their house of worship until I was in high school and could find better things to do on Sunday with my own car. Since the age of 7 or 8, when I really could recall actually considering the things being said at church to me, I have always felt uneasy about the veracity of those claims. As a young child, I was very interested in ancient history, ancient cultures, and prehistory. The Bible never seemed to jive with what we knew about pyramids, dinosaurs, cavemen, etc. I can recall being very suspicious of the entire project of religion, and I think I suspected, like the Easter Bunny, like with the Easter Bunny and the Cabbage Patch, that I was being told something that I would later be corrected on when I became older. To these ends, I went on to pursue a degree in philosophy and later bioethics, in part, I think, because I looked for people who had more mature and more honest views on religion. I've always been an inquisitive, open-minded cat who was fascinated by the claims, power, and psychological implications of religion, but never interested in the supernatural. What do you feel is the real dividing line between the religious believer and those who look at existential questions through a secular prism? As one who has crossed the boundary, perhaps you can explain it to someone like me who has never known a time when they believed. Both sides can be intelligent, both well-read and reasoned, but there's some magic insight that has one playing with their cards face up and the other face down. I'm not sure I completely know how to articulate this, but I hope you can help. Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is that believers generally have been indoctrinated, and it's a kind of an imprinting process. You see ducks following a dog around in the barnyard because the dog was the first thing they ever saw moving, and they thought it was their mother. And it's very difficult to give up beliefs inculcated when you were young, and especially by authority figures you trusted. So you kind of want it to be true. Plus, these religious beliefs have a big payoff if they're true. Immortality and all that stuff. It's and the comfort of believing somebody's in charge of the universe, even if it doesn't look like it, right? We'll find out when we go to heaven and all that. And if you like Freud, you realize these are just childish pipe dreams, or at least there's no particular reason to think they're not, right? That's his point. then that destroys a lot of comfort, but that's the real world, right? And so some people eventually cannot maintain the rationalizations, and it becomes preferable to stop the cognitive dissonance, the car alarm going, by saying, all right, I think I can adjust to reality. That's going to be less painful than tormenting myself, telling myself that I believe these things that I really know are not true. But it is painful, and so people would do anything, as witness the crazy antics of apologists, to avoid having to admit that to themselves. Whereas people that weren't raised with it can kind of see that the emperor has no clothes. They can, in other words, they can see there's no particular reason to believe the stuff, and so they tend to say, well, now what is there to believe? So the idea is that the first group thinks they have all the answers because they inherited all the answers, so they don't really need to look. What they use their considerable often brains doing is rationalizing the childhood. I mean, can you imagine an adult rationalizing belief in Santa Claus? Right? That's virtually nobody's doing that except Kevin Nealon on an old Saturday Night Live episode. But people will do it. They just cannot give it up. And the other side, you've got people saying, well, I'm not starting with a nice package of beliefs. Let's see what is believable. Let's see what seems to be true. So I think it has to do with the psychology of vested interests. Now, it doesn't mean that the whole theistic Christian religious thing couldn't be true. Right? We don't want to commit the genetic fallacy. It might be convenient and attractive to believe these things, but true anyway, right? Like it's convenient to believe that there's food, but there happens to be food, luckily. Yeah, that's true, as C.S. Lewis pointed out. But that isn't a reason to believe it. You'd better have reasons to think it's so. Otherwise, you'd just be an arbitrary and trying to place a halo over the word arbitrary by pronouncing it as faith. I call that intellectual dishonesty from the word go. You have to be ruthless with yourself. Okay. Sorry about this disgusting business. Okay, here's one more from Lachlan, the vampire predator. Since this is a biblically inspired Lovecraft question, feel free to use an Innsmouth accent. I'd have to be more inclined to burp at the moment to give some good croaking, I'm afraid. After listening to a few hundred preterism website questions, I later had a discussion about the doctrine of an empty hell and universal salvation, as per Revelation, saying it will be emptied, hell will be emptied in Revelation 20:13, and then the empty hell will be thrown into God's divine recycling bin on Revelation 20:14. Not just hell, but also death. I wonder how often the creed that Cthulhu is sleeping, not dead, and that death will die, is an echo of an earlier era in the faith where Cthulhu's rise was just around the corner. Are there any indications that there was an earlier tradition that has been erased, maybe due to deep time concepts introduced by Hindu or Aztec influences? I think there might be, because it will happen when the stars are right. That's a watch out for this, and when a list of signs is in the same tradition as in only with strange eons will death die, then the latter is a way of excusing the former. That's interesting. Lovecraft had read the King James Bible, and you certainly see the influence of Christian sectarianism in the Call of Cthulhu, the reference to the Theosophists, whom he really is describing as if they were Millerites, with donning the robes and waiting on the mountaintops. And the idea of a second coming of Cthulhu, and he's in his tomb now in Rillier and will come out. Dunwich Horror is very much based on Christian imagery, too, as Don Burleson and others have pointed out. But with a thing like this, built into the idea is the delay of the Parousia, the second coming of Cthulhu, right? But why is that so? Why doesn't Lovecraft just have it happen? And he explained to somebody in a letter about why Wilbur Whateley fails in the Dunwich Horror. He's trying to open the gates to the old ones who will clear the earth of all human life. But he fails. Why did Lovecraft do it that way? Why have the good guys win? And he said, I'm just not prepared to write a huge novel of that scope describing the end of the world, right? So it's got to stop with the serious threat being averted. Same sort of thing here. Cthulhu does actually emerge from his watery tomb in Rillier, but the world can't end. I mean, Thirst and the narrator, I think it's his name, can't very well say, and that's how the world ended, and now I'm going to stick this thing I've written into an envelope for nobody to read. You're not even going to have any envelopes left at that point. So the disappointment in the coming of the old ones is built right into the notion of the apocalypse of Cthulhu. Now, what you're making me wonder here, thinking out loud, is whether the delay motif in the New Testament is not similarly purely literary, to defer the end because if the end happens, you can't write about it. That's interesting. I got to do some thinking about that, and I appreciate the spark to the imagination, Lachlan. Well, I better get off here. I got some chores to do, but I just felt terrible about doing no Bible Geek for so long, and so here's a short one, and maybe I can squeeze in some more of those soon. As I think I'm sure I've mentioned it, I'm no longer working for Johnny Coleman Seminary, and just can't keep those teaching jobs. But they're a great bunch. I got nothing bad to say about them. But I'm not working there anymore, and the rather small income I gratefully received from them is now gone. And I'm trying to cut the budget and so forth, but things are really getting tight here at the Price Hovel or Palace, whatever you want to call it. If you can help us, sure would appreciate it. So, and also consider shelling out $100 for one of my audio courses. Email me about that at criticusaol.com. So, thanks for being with me on the Bible Geek, and I hope to see you again pretty darn soon.